I appreciate the privilege of being with you this morning, brothers and sisters. I've enjoyed the music and the prayer and the spirit of this occasion. If I were standing here in a state conference, I think I'd feel a little more at ease, but with all of these learned men about me, I feel very humble, and I hope I won't say anything that won't be right and proper, that I might leave you a little inspiration while we're here this morning. You know, it seems proper that we should be thinking of leadership and studying about leadership, because after all, according to our faith, we're born to be leaders. And you remember what Peter said in speaking to the saints of old. He said, "You're a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that you might show forth the praises of him who hath called you forth out of darkness unto his marvelous light." That's leadership. And when the Savior said, "Ye are the salt of the earth, and the leaven that shall leaven the lump," that's leadership. We couldn't salt the earth if we weren't leaders among men. And so it has been his purpose to gather out the elect and the chosen in order that they might wield an influence and power for good in the earth, to the honor and the glory of his name. And then you remember that we believe that we lived before we were born. And you remember the statement that is contained in the Pearl of Great Price, where the Lord stood in the midst of these spirits. Many were noble and great, and he said, "These I will make my rulers." And Abraham, thou wast one of them. Thou wast chosen before thou wast born. So that when we come into the world, through such lineage that we're heirs of the promised blessings of the Lord and the seed of Abraham, we ought to know that we're born to be leaders. And if we become only followers in our lives, we've failed, in my judgment, in achieving the purpose and the destiny for which we were created and sent into the world. So that's proper that we should be thinking of leadership and preparing ourselves for it. I think it was Roger Babson who made the statement that the great wealth of the United States and developed wealth was not in her forests, nor in her mines, nor in her waterways, but in the undeveloped talents of her citizenry. And that's the purpose of this institution and this leadership meeting, this leadership week, is to develop that power of leadership that's yet latent in the hearts and in the minds and the lives of the people of our Father in heaven. And I think it was Thomas Nixon Carver who indicated the greatness of the pioneering and nation building of this church. And he said that the leaders thereof seem to have an uncanny ability to discover hidden genius and to develop that genius. And many of us wouldn't have amounted to a great deal in leadership had it not been for the church and the opportunities that the church affords to us. Now we have a responsibility individually to develop our lives, not only for our own good, that we might live more richly and be prepared for eternal joy and happiness, but the Lord has given to us a great responsibility, and we need to live to prepare ourselves to meet that challenge and that responsibility. And every man and woman in this church ought to realize that they live to bless humanity, and therefore they need the ability of leadership in order that they might be able to bless. I want to read a little statement that I took from a preface of a book not long ago. There should be a desire in the heart of every man, however humble, to leave some vestige as he passes, to attest to future time the fact that he has been on earth and acted something there. Now we have that opportunity, and we wouldn't like to pass out of life without having left something to indicate that we'd lived. The world ought to have been made better because we were privileged to live in it. And if we arise to our opportunities, that will be true. I want to read a few words from James T. McKay regarding the life of Abraham Lincoln. And so they buried Lincoln, strange and vain. Has any creature thought of Lincoln hid in any vault, neath any coffin lid, in all the years since that wild spring of pain? 'Tis false. He never in the grave hath lain. Whoever will may find him anywhere, save in the tomb. Not there, he is not there. Now, you don't need anyone to tell you that Lincoln was great, that he was a great leader, because, as indicated, he doesn't lie in his coffin. Oh, his body's there, but his works follow him. And our works should follow us. And the works of all great leaders follow them. We've talked to the prophet Joseph in the prayer this morning that Brother Brown so beautifully offered. And I suppose that only the unfoldment of the eternities will teach us really the leader that he was and enable us to understand his greatness. You'll recall a statement made by Josiah Quincy, the former governor or mayor of Boston, in which he indicated that a textbook written for the study of generations yet unborn might contain a question something like this: what great American of the 19th century has exerted the greatest influence upon the lives of his countrymen? And he said, as strange as it may seem to most men now living, nevertheless, it may be an obvious commonplace to future generations that the answer to that question shall be Joseph Smith, the Mormon prophet. And how could it be otherwise if the claims of this church stand? I was traveling in Arizona 2 weeks ago with my wife and President Clark and 2 of his daughters. We were discussing the beauty of the church, its majesty, its destiny. I said, President Clark, it's the greatest movement in the world, or it's nothing. He says, that's right, LeGrand, that's right. It's the greatest movement in the world. And so, as the movement unfolds, and as it gains momentum and following and ability to understand and comprehend the value of the principles of leadership that have been committed to men in the world again, we'll be better able to understand the truth of the statement made by Josiah Quincy and how great the leadership of the prophet Joseph. And of course, that's only taking one, the greatest one of our time, because he was the instrument whom God raised up to usher in this great gospel dispensation, the fullness of times, embracing all other gospel dispensations. And standing by his side were great men. The first trip I made east many years ago, nearly 50 years ago, and went into Nauvoo, saw the kind of homes that had been erected there, I said to myself, one of the great evidences of the divinity of the call and the mission of the prophet Joseph was the type of men who surrounded him and who sustained him and who carried on after his life was taken as a sealing of his testimony unto all nations and all people. And those men did carry on, and they came into this great wilderness of the West. And we can't help but be appreciative of the great leadership ability that they possessed in the accomplishments that have unfolded before our eyes, and that we have beheld, and that we enjoy the fruits thereof. And while they came here, in the words of the ancient prophet, sorrowing because they left their homes, as President Grant used so often say, and I think quoting Erastus Snow, they left their homes in Nauvoo willingly, because they had to. Nevertheless, the Lord turned that sorrow into rejoicing, for He'd promised to do it. He said that He should turn their sorrow into rejoicing, and they should sorrow no more, and they should be satisfied with His care for them. And I tell you, some of us that are older than some of the rest of you down there, I see a few bald heads down in front of me, nearly as bad as mine, but we can remember when many of the good old pioneers were still living who marched across the plains. We can recall the testimony meetings we used to attend when they'd stand up and thank Almighty God for His guidance and His leadership in bringing them into the valleys of the mountains and relieving them and delivering them from the hands of their enemies, and for the comforts and the blessings that they enjoy in this land. And we pay tribute to that type of leadership, and we enjoy the fruits of that kind of leadership. And you can follow that thinking down all through the church. You don't need to confine it to the prophet Joseph, to Brother Brigham, and to those of the 12 who surrounded them. Why, standing by their sides were men and women full of faith in God that nothing could turn back. Now, you've heard this many times, but you remember how the family of Sister Grant, the mother of President Heber J. Grant, offered her every comfort and every consideration if she'd just return to them and give up her foolish ideas of Mormonism. But there wasn't enough money in the world to touch that woman and to turn her back. She'd put her hand to the plow, speaking in the words of the Savior, and she couldn't turn back because of her faith. Well, that's been true all down through the ages. I'm glad you've been studying genealogy. I hope some of you will take time to go back, especially if you've descended from people like that, or from converts from other lands who sacrificed everything in this life that was dear to them in order that their lots might be cast in this church. I had the privilege just during the last few weeks of reading from the diary of my great-great-grandfather on my mother's side, and then on her father's side, and then one of my relatives sent me copies of letters on my great-great-grandmother's side, on my mother's side. And I want to tell you that I thrilled as I read those things to think of the faith of those people and realize that that was the type of faith that surrounded the brethren, that made possible for them to achieve what they achieved. And the testimony of one of those great-great-grandfathers of his appreciation of the prophet Joseph when he went to Nauvoo, he says, and we had long since known that he had seen the Father and the Son and holy messengers from God, but now our eyes do see him, and we know that he is the greatest man we've ever met in mortality, a holy prophet of God. And on the mother's side, my great-great-grandfather and great-great-grandmother were assigned by Brother Brigham to prepare to raise corn up in Iowa when they'd been driven out of Nauvoo, to help the saints as they came through, in order that they might have food to carry them across the plains. And along came Sister Mary Fielding Smith, the wife of Hiram the patriarch, with her boy Joseph F., who helped and led and drove her team when he was 8 or 9 years old across the plains, and later became the president of the church. And she and Joseph sat up all night helping my great-great-grandfather and his wife shell the corn and get ready for the trip the next day. And as they went to leave, Sister Smith turned to him. She said, Brother Miller, I haven't anything to pay you with except Hiram's blessing, and that you shall have in great measure. I'd rather have had that kind of pay come to my ancestors than the money they might have accumulated. Men and women in this church have not lived for bread alone and for wealth and for money. They've lived to honor their calling, a chosen generation, peculiar people, a holy priesthood, that they might be considered worthy to stand. And when you follow that thought through until the day of the resurrection, and John banished upon the Isle of Patmos, saw those that should come forth in the morning of the first resurrection, and they shall become kings and priests unto God, and shall rule and reign with him eternally. That's leadership. No wonder our lives must be a preparation for leadership. No wonder in the restoration of the gospel we're told that the glory of God is intelligence, and that all the intelligence and knowledge we gain here in mortality will rise with us in the resurrection. And that if we get ahead of any others here, we'll be ahead of them there. Why should we want to sleep at the post? Why shouldn't we want to avail ourselves of the opportunity of learning more? Now that learning more can apply profitably in every endeavor of our lives, in our individual lives, in our home lives, in our service in the church, in the gaining of a livelihood, the selling. There's always room for the specialist, for the man at the top of the ladder. I like the little illustration that I read from one of Wiggum's books. I think it was on the marks of the educated man. My wife gave me that for a birthday present some years ago. She knew I needed it, and so did I, and so I read it. And one thing that Wiggum's told, a little story that I've used before, he told about the college professor who came into a farming community to try and induce the farmers to send their boys to the agricultural college. And in that particular town, there was Farmer John, who knew all about farming. And he boo-hooed the idea. He said, if you want to learn to farm, get out on the farm, he said, but not in the schoolroom. But his boy listened to the professor, and he got the idea he'd like to go to college, and he sold his mother on the idea, so you know what happened. Well, when he came back from college, the father said to the boy, now, son, you take half of the farm, and I'll take the other half, and we'll see who knows how to farm, the man from the farm or the man from the college. Well, one morning, the old gentleman came in. He says, Ma, what are those boxes up in son's window? Oh, she said, he's just testing his seed. He says, man who doesn't know seed when he sees it has no business on a farm. But when the crop was gathered in, the father had 60 bushel the acre, and the father had 60 bushel the acre, and the boy had 90 bushel the acre. I didn't think that was a true story until I was up in Idaho and found where they got 90 bushel the acre, and then I believed it. And so the next morning after the count was taken, father came down the steps, all dressed in his best bib and tucker, carrying his little traveling bag. And Ma says, where you going, Pa? I'm going to college, he said. Now, that's why some of you are here this morning, and why you've been here during this week. It's because you don't believe in letting good enough alone. 60 bushel the acre isn't good enough. I caught that from President Jensen this morning. I turned to him. I said, this is a great institution, isn't it? He says, it's going to be. Now, you see, to me, it was already a great institution, but to him, it's still only producing 60 bushel of the acre. He's got to get the 90 out of it. Well, I've said right from this very pulpit that if it didn't do anything, then the great mating job that it does, it'd be one of the greatest assets the church owns, but nevertheless, apparently, it has a greater destiny and mission than that to perform. Now, if you can raise more wheat by learning how to plant better and to cultivate the soil and to select your seed, you can raise better children, more noble children, by learning how to be better fathers and better mothers. And I want to tell you, if you can come to a place like this and gain some of that knowledge, it'll not be money wasted. For your children and your posterity are worth more to you than all the wealth in this world. And we ought to learn how to take care of them after we get them. It's like I've used the illustration before, just to raise barley doesn't mean you're doing good in the world if all that barley goes into making liquor. Just to bring children into the world doesn't give you exaltation in the eternal worlds, but it's bringing those children into the world and then being real fathers and real mothers to them and seeing that something comes out of those lives that you've been privileged to be the parents of. Brother B.S. Hinckley tells the story about Mrs. Compton from the East, and always impressed me, who had 3 boys and 1 daughter. And in college they checked up on the degrees, and these 4 children had received 30 degrees. So they conferred an honorary degree upon this mother for doing such a common job in such an uncommon manner. A mother who could bring 4 children through with that kind of achievement. I was talking to a stake president a few years ago, and incidentally he's still living and working in one of the temples as one of the presidency, and he said he'd just been to the canyon with his father's family and an outing. And he says, Bishop, there were 300 of us there. There were only 3 that didn't keep the word of wisdom. And deep down in my soul, I said, thanks, God, for the leadership of a priest in his own home that could raise a posterity like that and have influence enough with them so that they would do the thing that he wanted them to do and live the truth. I told that story up in Idaho one day outside of a building while we were waiting at a convention, and one man turned over and he says, I got 2 sons of my own who smoke, and just if he had 2 in the mission field. Now, it's what do we expect if we set our mark high and we believe it can be achieved? It can be achieved, but it's going to take faith, and it's going to take works, and it's going to take righteous living, and no man and woman can expect to quarrel with each other and live in a house that's a bedlam and expect their children to arise in dignity and honor and power and leadership in the world and in righteous living. You just can't drive them there. You know, I used in one of our general conferences a little article that appeared in the Aquinas magazine on how dumb children are. They're just so dumb. This man took the illustration that when he went out every Sunday morning golfing, his kids were so dumb they couldn't understand why they had to go to Sunday school instead of going fishing or hunting or something else while father was out on the golf course. And the little girl was so dumb that when her mother would have her answer the telephone and say that mother isn't home, when she was home, she couldn't understand why that little girl could lie like Ananias, because that little girl was so dumb that she couldn't understand why she couldn't lie when her mother lied. And the father, who when he'd hit his finger with a hammer or run out in the lot and catch his neck on the clothesline, would curse with every name he could think of until the air turned blue. And then when his little son saw the cat running across the table, and says, look at that damn cat. And then the father washed his mouth out with soap. He was so dumb
He couldn't understand why his mouth should get washed out with soap while his father didn't get any correction for what he'd done. Now I want to tell you, we have a great responsibility in these homes. We have them in our individual lives. And I just like to say to these men who are your teachers, they have a great responsibility. And I think you have some marvelous men here. But I hope that none of them will teach only the textbooks. I hope they'll teach boys and girls. Some of you may recall that Brother Bowen stood right where I am now when they officially inaugurated, or whatever you want to say, Brother McDonald as president of this institution. And I was down there and listened. And Brother Bowen spoke. And Brother Bowen told about the colleges he'd attended and the professors he'd sat under. But he said, of all of them, one man stands out in my life, a teacher in the AC at Logan, who put into my heart a desire to make my life worthwhile in the world. Now, I want to tell you, that was worth all the textbooks that were ever written. Anybody can write textbooks, that is of sort and kind, but it isn't everybody that can put that kind of ambition into the lives of boys and girls. And that's what this school ought to be to the nth degree. Men and women ought to come here and be able to leave and go away with not a doubt left in their souls as to the divinity of this great latter-day work, and that God lives, and that he appeared to the prophet Joseph with his son, this Redeemer of the world. That's our great mission. Now I see the time's gone, and like usual, I never get quite through, but I want to read one more little thing here before I close. We spoke of leadership. I want to give you as my final thought. And Brother Brown mentioned it in his prayer. I love Brother Brown. I got a boy who loves him, guess, more than I do, because he knows him better. He's one of his missionaries. He thinks Brother Brown's one of the great men of the world. This is on the life of the Redeemer. Christ was placed midmost in the world's history, and in that central position towers like some vast mountain to heaven, the farther slope stretching backward toward creation, the hither slope toward the consummation of all things. The ages before looked to him with prophetic gaze. The ages since behold him by historic faith. By both he is seen in common as the brightness of his Father's glory and the unspeakable gift of God to man. Now, brothers and sisters, if it were not for that life and the faith that we have in it, then we could say, in the words of the Redeemer, "Come, let us eat, drink, and make merry, for tomorrow we die." But to the faith that we have in his divine leadership and the price he paid that we might live again, we know that as we near the grave, even in old age, we're only approaching the fountain of eternal youth. You know, I think a lot about that because I labored down the South as president of that mission, and there were all those old historic parts and places where these Spaniards came in search of the fountain of eternal youth in the early history of our church. And every time I'd drink at one of them, I'd say to myself, they can't do it, can they? But there's someone who can do it. The great gospel of the Son of Man can give you eternal youth. And some of us old bald-headed fellows get a little comfort out of Alma's words when he saw every limb restored to its proper place, and not even a hair of the head shall be lost. Now, I thank the Lord that in all my interpretation of the Scriptures and the gospel plan, the Lord Almighty deals in additions and not subtractions to those who are true, faithful. Thank God for this great institution and the leadership thereof and the good they're doing. And thank Him for the saints and the faith they have and the desire they have to become the light unto the world and an ensign to the nations, to become the salt of the earth. And that spells leadership. And God prepare us for it, I pray, and leave you my love and blessing in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.